The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar. Today, sponsored by our friends at Rock Technologies. I'm Barbara Duke, Editor-in-Chief here at Directions Magazine, joined by our webinar producer, Lynette Qualia. If you have any questions about your connections, just drop us a note in the chat. We'll be happy to help you. Thank you to our loyal community for being with us for 25 years now. We continue to deliver news, webinars, articles, podcasts, and hope that you'll stop by often. We are saving your questions, so we're only going to be 20 minutes today, so type those in anytime during the webinar. The good folks over at Rock will follow up with you after today's session. If you see something you like on the screen, just snap a photo with that camera button. We are recording the webinar today, so keep an eye on your inbox for more information in the coming days. And we appreciate your participation on our survey as well. We are happy to welcome back Jason Harris and Paul Pallas, and they are ready to talk about Kubernetes and ArcGIS with us. And so without further ado, we'll pass it over to them so we can make the most of our time. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, nice to be here again. Let's see, how's my screen looking?
Awesome.
All right, here we go. All right, so as Barbara mentioned, this is Kubernetes and ArcGIS staying ahead of the evolving tech. I'm gonna blast through these first couple of slides pretty quick. Just real quick, the agenda. We're gonna give you a brief introduction to who we are, who is Rock Technologies. Then we're gonna get into what ArcGIS Enterprise has looked like over the years. Then what is Kubernetes and what are the benefits? Why should we think about using this? Some of the key features of ArcGIS Enterprise specifically on Kubernetes. Then we're gonna talk about considerations for actually adopting Kubernetes. Is this gonna be right for me? And if you're not there yet, but you're thinking about it, what can you be doing to sort of prepare yourself to make that move to Kubernetes? As we just saw a second ago, my name is Jason Harris. We have Brian Pallas. These are essentially two faces that only a mother could love. That's me on the left, and that's Brian on the right. He's the Kubernetes extraordinaire.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Brian. So of course, here is the shameless plug that you knew was going to be coming. But actually, in this case, it really is actually applicable to what we're going to be discussing. So just think of this slide as more of a, why you should be listening to us kind of talk. So at Rock, it is our sole focus to architect, deploy, and manage the ArcGIS Enterprise Suite and desktop applications in cloud and hybrid environments. We have been recognized as an Esri Cloud Specialty Partner. Our team of certified AWS and Azure and Esri experts bring many, many years of very extensive multidisciplinary knowledge to each and every organization that we serve. With these highly scalable, highly durable, cost-effective, cloud-first technologies, Rock can take IT and ArcGIS Enterprise management off of your plate so you can focus on what it is that you do best, and that is GIS. Even more recently, we are very excited to have become the very first partner in the Esri Partner Network to earn the ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes Specialty designation. I really do want to give a big shout out to Brian and really the entire cloud team at Rock for working so hard to make this happen. I know that it was no small feat, so good job. So let's start it off. How did we get here? I realize that we're all here to talk about the latest and greatest in cloud native technologies, but it's really important to remember and examine how we got here and why a shift to Kubernetes is really such a big deal. So how did we get here? What did an ArcGIS Enterprise or an ArcGIS system traditionally look like? Well, traditionally speaking, ArcGIS as a whole was a very client-centric desktop application. We worked primarily on our desktop computers and we had some local files. Now, I know, of course, I'm simplifying that a little bit here, Many of us may remember Map Objects IMS or ArcIMS, which did extend the desktop mapping kind of pattern to the early days of the web, but we can set that aside for now. Really, the next big player to enter the stack outside of a client desktop and onto a server was the database, or as us GIS nerds call it, the geodatabase, right? So now we have a bunch of client desktops running ArcGIS, talking to a geodatabase server, and that was a really big paradigm shift, right? But of course, the beginnings of a true enterprise GIS now really starts to take shape. And as we all know, ArcGIS Server was really only the beginning. So ArcGIS Enterprise, here it is, in all its glory. And this continues to evolve to this very day. You know, we have now a portal, a data store, lots of additional server roles, and you know, we've gained huge amounts of new capabilities. But along with all of that new capability, and hopefully as you see in this little diagram, well, big diagram, that all of that new server hardware was needed to run it all. And as ArcGIS Enterprise continued to grow, all of a sudden, there's a lot of hardware to manage, and there's a lot of additional complexity that was introduced to maintain all of the interconnected bits of ArcGIS Enterprise. It's at this point, well, it's hopefully at this point that many of us realize that virtualization of these servers, or even better, moving the stack to into the cloud was a good idea. There's many more tools to manage both the hardware, software, security stack in a cloud environment. And I would guess that this is probably where the majority of folks that are listening to this webinar are currently sitting. Some of you are probably still managing physical servers, some have virtualized on premise, and some of you have either moved or planning a move to the cloud. The ArcGIS stack, when deployed properly, becomes much, much easier to manage in the cloud. But even in the cloud, and this is really particularly true for larger deployments, you know, there can be significant scaling, HA, redundancy, and management challenges of that stack. We got to remember, these are still servers, and they still require, you know, special care and feeding to ensure that everything is running smooth. So that's how we got here. That's where we are now. What does the future hold for ArcGIS Enterprise deployments going forward? I'm glad you asked, everyone. Yes, you did guess correctly. Part of that future is Kubernetes. And this would be a really good time to actually tell you what Kubernetes actually is. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Thanks, Jason. What is Kubernetes? That is a great question. Briefly, Kubernetes is a container orchestration service. It serves as a platform to deploy and manage containerized applications. It maintains the cluster of machines needed to run those containers and applications, and automatically handles load balancing, scaling, failover, and many other services related to keeping your applications stable and running. Kubernetes itself is a critical tool for developing and running modern cloud-native services and applications. Many web services that you see these days are all built using Kubernetes. Containerization itself, just a quick overview, is just a way of packaging an application along with its dependencies, and it makes it portable and platform agnostic. Any service, Kubernetes or otherwise, that can run a container can run these containers. So you don't have to worry about what operating system underneath it's running, as long as the container itself is configured properly. So these applications that you can containerize range from simple to complex. You can have a lightweight web server just serving up a static web page, one container. You can use containers like a Python runtime container, load it with dependencies, and have it trigger a script, whether it be run on demand or scheduled. And then further, you can actually start layering these containers You can replicate a traditional 3-tier application with a web tier as the entry point. You can develop individual APIs running on containerized microservices using any number of languages, Python, JavaScript, anything that you can think of really. And then you can also bring in your database tier or connect to an external database in a cloud service. But most importantly, finally, building off that last example, one of the most powerful things Kubernetes does on top of just running containers on a local system is that you can develop complex collections of these containerized microservices. You can configure your resource and scalability requirements of each microservice. Tools are available to secure the communications between the services, and you can integrate comprehensive metric and log monitoring. And of course, this is really what you're going to see if you take a deeper look into ArcGIS Enterprise for Kubernetes. But as Jason noted, complex applications are not new and novel, but there are other benefits that Kubernetes provides. So let's take a look at those. So first, declarative configuration. Kubernetes resources are defined using YAML-based declarative components called manifests. Deploying in this fashion ensures that resources are configured to the proper spec and changes to individual pieces can be made in place without affecting other resources and potentially not even having to restart existing services that you're modifying. Standard resource schema patterns ensure compatibility across cloud-based Kubernetes flavors. Again, this makes containers and Kubernetes manifests transferable across systems. And just very, very briefly, if you look at the manifest example in the middle, this is almost like a hello world web server example. This, all you have to do is say, this is the container image that I am looking for, run it, and you send that information to the server and it stands up the container. So beyond just picking a container and running it though, Kubernetes provides additional patterns, things like replica sets of containers, cloud-specific load balancing resources, and integrated health checking that can be used to improve site reliability. Again, basic example, you can see in this configuration, there's a replica attribute, it's set to 3. So what that means is this deployment is actually going to stand up 3 identical containers or pods that run the same service. And so with this, Kubernetes can manage the distribution of traffic to these services. Health checks can be put into place to identify what a failing pod is and what to do when you fail a health check, and generally Kubernetes would be smart enough to automatically replace that service while not disrupting, well, it'll replace that pod without disrupting the service as a whole. And another big key here is observability. So Kubernetes itself doesn't come packaged with a nice GUI like Windows does. But underneath the hood, the containers and other system components produce standardized metrics. These metrics can be consumed with tools like Prometheus and displayed with a service like Grafana. Each cloud provider has its own flavor of Kubernetes, and these metrics are also consumed by them. And this really increases observability into a complex system. So each of these things that are generic benefits to Kubernetes itself have also been deeply integrated into the ArcGIS Enterprise for Kubernetes application itself. So let's take a closer look. We'll dig deeper into these key features as we take a closer look.
All right, thanks, Brian. So using Kubernetes for ArcGIS Enterprise provides many benefits, including, as Brian was talking about, including like automatic scaling of resources to handle, your fluctuating workloads. I think we've probably all been there at some point. One of your apps is all of a sudden, gets a huge traffic spike. So ask yourself, were you able to actually recognize that huge traffic spike in time? And if you were, did you even have that ability to scale your resources quickly enough to meet that demand? So Kubernetes for ArcGIS Enterprise allows you to easily scale these map services, automatically, or even assign resource limits to specific services. Kubernetes also allows for greatly improved reliability and availability through these self-healing mechanisms that Brian was mentioning. Have you ever had an enterprise component like a data store or a portal fail? Imagine that your new stack was aware that there was this failure and it was able to heal itself. Your critical application infrastructure is configured now to be highly available with Kubernetes. So we get a highly available infrastructure. We get, service scaling, easy management of a very complex, multi-component ArcGIS Enterprise system by containerizing these different components. And to me, this is a pretty much a winning combination. And
yeah, so
Brian.
Yeah, so as we just saw, these services, there's so many of them. It's more than just portal, server, data store that you're used to. Each of these have been broken down into more and more individual microservices. But what happens when those services are improved on or more new ones are added? So we're all familiar with the significant effort that goes into upgrading existing systems to take advantage of new Esri releases. We previously might have to set aside our weekends and schedule some downtime to do these major upgrades to our services and our servers. But utilizing Kubernetes and the container-based architecture allows for faster and more streamlined deployment of the system. And it really limits the effect on site availability. Most of the time, you might just have to switch to read-only mode as opposed to having any significant downtime. With this container-based architecture, the upgrades can be done in place. How this works is as updates are issued, patches are released, or features are added, Esri will publish these new features or new versions of the microservice to their Docker hub, and ArcGIS for Kubernetes will pull down the latest images and perform a rolling update or a blue-green deployment of these services. And how that works is it'll safely load up the new ones. When those report to Kubernetes that those are healthy, then a switch over will take place, and you can retire the older outdated container images and have the latest and greatest in place. And that's just kind of like your traditional blue-green deployment there.
All right. I bet I probably don't even need to show this slide at this point. You probably have already determined some pretty solid use cases for yourselves, but here are just some examples of how Kubernetes for ArcGIS Enterprise, would benefit your organization in some real world scenarios. I'm sure we've all dreamt maybe one day that you had a map service or you had something that just blew up like the COVID dashboard did in March 2020. You never know when an application or a service might go viral. This actually did happen to us many years ago. We had a map service that it got blasted out through the Associated Press, and it just absolutely blew up our infrastructure. This was before cloud, but I know what that can be like. So we know that Kubernetes, we're going to have much finer grained control over all aspects of our resources. So we can scale those individual services up. Now, of course, if we're getting millions and billions of views, that would certainly require, like significant additional hardware, right? But the good part is adding that hardware to this existing Kubernetes stack is essentially trivial, and the scalability is very easily configurable. Second, my service is critical, right? Some services are critical for business continuity. You can think about E911 systems. These are things that simply cannot go down. To have that HA and built-in redundancy that Kubernetes offers is a pretty big win. last. I need better management. I've got a giant system that's got server roles, and I've got data stores and web servers. And Brian spoke briefly about how Kubernetes can integrate with other systems like Grafana, and these tools, many of which are already built in to Kubernetes and can talk to Kubernetes. This is going to give us ArcGIS management people a single pane of glass to monitor our entire ArcGIS Enterprise system. This is going to make the system just so much easier to manage as a whole. And Brian, you're going to talk about some of the different considerations that you're going to need to think about.
Yeah, so adopting ArcGIS for Kubernetes does require some things to take under consideration. A lot of things will need to be updated when you're assessing your suitability to move to ArcGIS Enterprise for Kubernetes. First and foremost, ArcGIS Pro is mandatory. Kubernetes Enterprise is on version 11. ArcGIS Pro 3.0 is the companion release for that. You minimally will need 2.8 to even publish services, but you really should be utilizing Pro 3 or greater when you're interacting with the Kubernetes environment. Of course, this might not be news to many of you 10.9.1 and above users, as ArcMap published services are being depreciated. If you're still not on Pro, I encourage you to set some time aside and really get to know it. It's a great piece of software, and the way it integrates in modern enterprise, Kubernetes or otherwise, is really impressive. The second, not all server roles are currently supported in ArcGIS Enterprise for Kubernetes. For example, image server is not yet built in. You are, though, able to federate an existing image server to your Kubernetes enterprise. So if you have a VM in your cloud environment that's stood up next to your Kubernetes deployment, and you enable those to talk, you can bring that image server in. But it should be noted that image server and other server roles are expected eventually to be added to ArcGIS Enterprise for Kubernetes in the future. Another thing is to just take note of your migration needs. There's going to be probably some extra care needed. Rock really likes to utilize the WebGIS DR tool to transfer enterprise to enterprise data, but this is not available and in Kubernetes. So careful planning and consultation should be taken when kind of assessing what needs to be brought over, how you're going to bring it over, and how to connect in your existing data sources. Next is kind of like assessing your complementary tasks. So traditional operating system access is not available. Like I said, there's not that Windows GUI that's available in a Kubernetes environment. For many, that's great. You don't have to worry about the operating system. There's nothing else running, on your servers. But other people have existing jobs and tasks and add-ons on their Windows servers that that may not be able to transfer over. So many people do things like utilize the task scheduler to run complementary jobs or updates to your data. And then there's also other plugins, third-party software on your servers. So this can be a big difference. There are some ways you can get around some of the things like the scheduled tasks. First, consider utilizing your built-in geoprocessing services. That is a built-in function of ArcGIS Enterprise and Arc Server. And then secondly, you like I was discussing with the Python examples much earlier, you can look into actually containerizing your scripts themselves and integrating them as part of your Kubernetes platform. So if you have daily scripts that need to run at night, you can load those into a container and schedule them using something like a cron job. But that's not to say that the system runs as a black box. A savvy command line user can troubleshoot individual pods, pull logs, and restart containers if it comes down to it. But doing so requires definite changes in your traditional workflows to manage these server features. So, be prepared to invest a significant time in learning these new systems. There will be a learning curve, and workflows will change. But this is a really cool piece of software, and if this still interests you and excites us like it does, excites you like it does to us, we can get you prepared. So we have a few things to just go over that you might want to start to take a look at internally to see if you're ready to take on ArcGIS for Kubernetes and to see if it's suitable for you and your organization. So, ideally, there's two things you want to take inventory of. It's your current footprint and your IT environment, so the systems that you have and the data sources and what you're connecting to, and then it's your team's skill set and knowledge itself. So first, to assess your enterprise GIS footprint, you think about what version am I currently running, what desktop clients am I running, am I capable of upgrading to ArcGIS Pro 3.0? Are any of my other workflows incompatible with the Kubernetes environment? Like I was saying, if there's certain plugins that you're relying on, you might have to think about how those add-ons or any existing tasks need to be reassessed and translated into the new environment. And those things are possible. Think about how much migration is needed. It's vital to assess all of the dependencies of your system, not just your portal server data store, your enterprise environment, but like everything that you connect to, how your users access the services externally, what your end users are doing with scripts and automation and add-ons, all those things. Secondly, it's a new technology. It's a different style of operating system of computing service than most people are used to. It's completely different, and that's kind of what's cool about it. But you do have to have a team that's willing to familiarize themselves with these new technologies. But if your team is already doing certain things, you might be well on your way. So if your organization is already utilizing things like Docker, if you are using cloud services like ECS or Google Cloud Run to schedule small Docker tasks, or even if you're using AWS Lambda functions, which in a sense is like a little mini scheduled container, those are strong skills that can transfer right on over to these to this type of environment. If you're excited to learn how to write Docker files, how to containerize and schedule these tasks, then this is something that will lead right into managing this system. And then finally, beyond just what am I running in my infrastructure and who's running it, you have to ask, am I capable of making these changes to my existing infrastructure? It's a big shift. You potentially could stand up a system side by side, which is something that we've done for some clients where they can kind of slowly integrate themselves into the new service. Or, if you're ready to start fresh, that would be a perfect scenario to be able to kind of start to adopt these containerized, cloud-native, cloud-forward workflows. And one of the easiest things to do is ask a trusted managed service provider that's familiar with the process. What are things that are going to change? How can I deal with these and make workarounds and do things to prepare for that move? And it's important to remember that ArcGIS for Kubernetes is simply one application that runs on top of a Kubernetes cluster. So if you have if your organization has an existing Kubernetes deployment, or you've been mandated to start a large-scale transition to Kubernetes, this would be a great place to start. But you can also if you simply want to leverage Kubernetes for ArcGIS and your enterprise GIS and take advantage of all of these built-in benefits that we've been talking about, that's entirely possible as well if you have a dedicated cluster for your ArcGIS environment. So remember, both of those things are possible. We know that, so we hope that you're now ready to go, but we'll let Jason wrap things up here.
Thank you, Brian. All right, so we're going to do some key takeaways from this, very brief presentation. I know we're running a little over here. First thing to remember is that Kubernetes is different, and this is a major shift from our normal 3-tier server architecture that most of us are used to. There is no underlying operating system to tinker with, which again, Brian said, for some, that's going to be really welcomed, right? We don't necessarily want to tinker with the operating system, but for others, maybe not so much. With anything new, there is going to be a learning curve. Kubernetes, as I hope that we have showed, there's a lot of advantages to this type of deployment over traditional ArcGIS Enterprise deployment. We have quick scaling, self-healing, very fine-grained tuning, all with no interruption for inline upgrades and patches. Just think of no more long weekends upgrading your stack. But most importantly, I want to leave you with this one. Yeah, that's a little weird, right? ArcGIS for Kubernetes really changes nothing. Your end users continue to interact with the enterprise the same way that they always have. They access their content from portal, consume services the same way that they are used to. The end user experience is exactly the same. Kubernetes is simply a new way to deliver that common familiar experience and a much more performant and easier to manage system. And with that, we are done, and I apologize. We ran over a little bit. There was a lot of complex stuff to talk about, and I know we really kind of just barely scratched the surface, so I really do want to make sure that everybody knows to feel free to reach out to us with any questions you might have. We're total nerds. We love stuff. We love talking about stuff like this. So, really do reach out.
Thanks, Jason. Well, we appreciate you being here and starting the conversation about some of these complex things. I'm sure there's more coming from you guys in the future. So folks, don't forget to keep an eye on your inbox. Let us know what you think on the survey on the way out. Thanks again to these talented guys, as well as their buddy Kate helping us out in the background. We hope that you go make it a great day. Tell a friend about Rock and Directions Magazine. Thanks, everybody.